And you can begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. And before I do, I can assure you that once you start a PhD program, the rest of the world disappears. All right, hello and welcome to Learning from Home, and welcome to the Hewlett-Woodmere Public Library's profile of 200 years on the Erie Canal. My name is Dr. Bill THIERFELDER, and I'll be your host today. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired professor of arts and humanities and a docent emeritus from the American Museum of Natural History in New York. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I'm speaking to you from today, and where I'm an artist, writer, and lecturer. But I also return regularly to New York, where I continue my work at the museum and enjoy the wonders of the Big Apple. Now, since we can't cover everything about this today's topic in one presentation, I'd like to invite you to take a deeper dive on my website, which is makingwings.net, and it's deeper dive number 102. Now, let me demonstrate that for you. So it's one word, makingwings.net. And you should be seeing that now, but because I'm a perfectionist, I will double check that, make sure we're sharing. This will bring you to my homepage. You can go to what's called the hamburger menu in the upper left corner. You're going to see things in the drop down. Please feel free to visit any of these. But for these library presentations, you're going to want the deeper dives, and this is 102, so it's the second batch there. Click on the little blue arrow here, little downward arrow, and you're going to get more in the drop down. These are programs that I have given or will be giving in the near future. Again, you can feel free, please visit any of them. But today is 102, 200 years on the Erie Canal. And what you're going to find there is an overview. And if you want more, like this overview, part of this comes from a Wikipedia page. Well, if you click on that, you'll be brought to the Wikipedia page. When you're done, you click it off, and you're back on my page. And this holds true for all of the links that I have on my website. I have recommended media. I will be talking about that during the program, but if you don't have a paper and pencil handy, it's right here on the website. You can copy it down there. There are print resources. And again, like the Erie Canal Museum, wonderful place to visit, and they have a great website. You can go to that. And I love it. It's a museum, right? You can visit, and of course, they want you to donate too. But once you're done, and there is, by the way, the Bicentennial Gala in October of this year. When you're done, you just go back and you're on my page again. So we have print resources, video resources, and then I have sections about some of the big players in the building of the Erie Canal, like DeWitt Clinton and Benjamin Wright, etc. So all kinds of really cool stuff there. And I hope that you can take advantage of that. Now, everything that you're going to hear in this program today uses the web resources and the books that you see on my website. Now, but for this presentation, I especially used the following sources to build the structure and the script, and that's the Erie Canal Museum, the History Channel, the Smithsonian, and Britannica and Wikipedia. Now, one of the things that I did point out on the website was suggested media. Wedding of the Waters by Peter Bernstein is an excellent place to start. The Birth of Empire by Evan Cornag focuses on the man behind the Erie Canal, that was Governor DeWitt Clinton. And if you can find a copy online or in a used bookstore, The American Heritage Publishing Company's The Erie Canal, which was published in 1964, is a gem. Okay. I remember having these American Heritage Junior Library books as a kid, and they were wonderful. And unfortunately, my copy of some of these books have disappeared, I guess, in all the moves I've made in my life. But it's a good one, and it's not in print anymore, but you can find it at old, bookstores. We here in Portland have Powell's Books. In New York, you might have the Strand, for example, down in Manhattan. Anyway, it's worth it. Three more fine books are The Raging Erie by Mark Ferreira, which includes an examination of the laborers who constructed the canal. You have Heaven's Ditch, with that great subtitle, God, Gold, and Murder on the Erie Canal by Jack Kelly, and Artificial River by Carol Sheriff. Those are also very insightful introductions. So any of the books, these 6 books I've just recommended, are really well written and engaging. So with all of that said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you a short video and then build on that video with specifics as we move along. So this is a 5-minute overview from the Daily Bell Ringer, great little website that nicely sums up where we're going today. Now, you may have to adjust the sound on your devices, and again, beware, closed captioning on YouTube isn't always the greatest, but it gives you a great...
Today we're looking at the Erie Canal. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bell Ringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, don't forget to check out dailybellringer.com, where you'll find more resources that go with many of the Bell Ringer videos. Stretching over 350 miles, the Erie Canal through northern New York State connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Built during the first half of the 1800s, basically dug by hand prior to large-scale excavating machinery being available, the Erie Canal is considered to be a marvel of engineering. The canal would turn New York City into an economic powerhouse as goods and resources flowed through the city, and the city went from a population of 120,000 in 1825 to over 1 million by 1860. All along the canal, major cities and towns grew, such as Buffalo, Rochester, and Albany. Ever since the earliest explorers came to North America, there had been a search for a waterway that would connect the interior of the continent to the Atlantic Ocean. The Midwestern region, what today would be states such as Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, had a wealth of resources, minerals, timber, and especially fertile farmland to grow crops. However, trying to get these resources to markets on the East Coast was difficult and time-consuming, as everything had to be loaded and moved over land pulled by horses or oxen. In 1807, New York merchant Jesse Hawley began writing essays suggesting a canal be constructed connecting Lake Erie at Buffalo to Albany, New York on the Hudson River. The Hudson River would then flow down to New York City. Hawley's idea caught the attention of the mayor of New York City, DeWitt Clinton, who saw the canal as the key to the growth of New York. In 1817, Clinton was elected governor of New York and made building the canal his #1 priority. On July 4, 1817, construction of the canal began near Utica, New York. Work was difficult and slow as the crews were attempting to dig a canal 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep, with much of it being through thick forest that had to be cleared and going through solid rock which could only be moved by using gunpowder to blast their way through. 2 years after construction began, only the first 15 miles were complete, with over 340 miles to go. Many in New York blamed the slow progress on Governor Clinton and began to call the project Clinton's Ditch or Clinton's Folly. Progress continued, however, as it is estimated that close to 50,000 workers would take part in the construction over the next 8 years, with a large portion of the workforce being made up of Irish immigrants who had recently come to America. Of the 50,000 that worked on the canal, it's estimated that over 1,000 people died during the construction due to blasting accidents, construction collapses, and many dying from disease. One challenge that had to be overcome was the elevation difference between Buffalo and Albany, with Buffalo sitting over 400 feet higher than Albany. In order to make the canal flow smoothly between the two cities, a series of 83 locks, which would raise and lower boats to different levels to account for the elevation change, were constructed. They also had to construct two aqueducts, or in other words, water bridges, for the canal to flow over other streams. After 8 years of construction, on October 26, 1825, the Erie Canal officially opened, connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. The total cost to build the canal was just over $7 million. Governor Clinton boarded a boat called the Seneca Chief and led a victory flotilla down the 363 miles of the canal. The canal revolutionized transportations of goods and people. Prior to the canal's construction, the trip from Buffalo to Albany took 2 weeks traveling on a stagecoach. Now the trip only took 5 days. Goods and raw materials from the Midwest region could now be shipped cheaper and quicker than ever before. New York City eclipsed other major port cities of the U.S., as by 1853, 62% of all U.S. trade was traveling along the canal. In the following decades, the canal was widened and deepened to handle the ever-increasing traffic along the waterway. Eventually, however, as railroads began to be built across the nation connecting east to west, the canal began to be used less and less as railroads could travel more direct routes to different locations. In the early 1900s, the state of New York constructed updated, larger canals to handle barge traffic, and much of the original Erie Canal was abandoned. Today, much of the original canal is preserved for its historic significance and is used primarily by recreational boaters. The Erie Canal, an amazing feat of engineering and construction, truly transformed the country as it connected the East Coast to the interior of the continent and sparked enormous growth and prosperity as the young nation was establishing its identity. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.
So what I would like to do now is spend the rest of our program developing and enhancing the material that you just saw. So off we go down the Erie Canal. Taking advantage of the Mohawk River Gap in the Appalachian Mountains, the 363-mile-long Erie Canal was the first canal in the United States to connect Western waterways with the Atlantic Ocean. Beginning in the 1780s, various plans were proposed to improve navigation on the Mohawk River down towards the Hudson. In 1792, the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company, how's that for a name, was incorporated by the state of New York and given the rights to improve navigation on rivers and lakes west of Albany. Under the leadership of Revolutionary War hero General Philip Schuyler, the company focused most of its activity on the Mohawk River, clearing the riverbed and digging several short canals to bypass river rapids. Now, although the company achieved some success in making improvements to the river, it never had the financial resources to tackle the larger navigation obstacles in the river. Eventually, the company found itself short of funds and hindered by New York State partisan politics. Well, that hasn't changed. It never fully completed any of its projects. In 1820, New York State purchased the company's works, thus closing the books on the 18th century canal scheme. Still, the Mohawk River clearly provided a valuable path from the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, so plans for a new canal continued to be debated. Meanwhile, a new canal project began gaining momentum, and DeWitt Clinton proved to be the greatest advocate, promoting the idea of a Western Canal as early as 1811 when he was serving in the New York State Senate. Clinton won initial approval for a canal in 1816 and was named commissioner of the project by the New York State Legislature. The following year, in 1817, Clinton was elected governor of New York, and he persuaded the state legislature to authorize loans for $7 million to build a canal from Buffalo on the eastern shore of Lake Erie to the upper Hudson River, passing through the Mohawk Valley region. Now, because there were no engineering schools in the United States at the time, Chief Engineer Benjamin Wright and his corps of self-taught engineers were successful in overcoming the technological problems faced by the canal, which needed to move boats through more than 500 feet of elevation from the west to the east. Now, a quick note, that opening video from the bell ringers said the elevation difference from west to east was 400 feet. It's a slight error. The actual difference is closer to 500 feet. By the way, one of the positive effects of the construction of the Erie Canal was the realization that there was a need for engineering schools. And it led to the founding of the nation's first School of Civil Engineering in 1824. And that's the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, RPI. Still there, still growing strong, still one of the country's great engineering schools. Well, I'm going to have a couple of sidebars here. I'm going to have a sidebar and dive a little more into the life of DeWitt Clinton, who lived from 1769 to 1828. And in addition to being an American politician, he was also a deeply committed naturalist. Now, a quick summary of his political career is quite impressive. He served as a United States Senator, as the mayor of New York City, and as the 6th governor of New York. And further, in 1812, Clinton ran for president of the United States. Now, DeWitt was a nephew of George Clinton, who served as New York State governor and then as vice president of the United States for Thomas Jefferson and then for James Madison. DeWitt was his uncle's secretary before launching his own political career. As a Democratic Republican, Clinton won election to the New York State Assembly in 1798. And that was the beginning of his career, and that was before serving as a U.S. Senator. Returning from Washington to New York, Clinton served 3 terms as mayor of New York City and then the lieutenant governor of New York State. And I love this. I found this in doing my research. On the left, you see a check signed by Clinton in 1814 when he was mayor of New York. The things you find when you do digging and research. Now, as we already mentioned, in the 1812 election, Clinton won support from the Federalists, as well as from a group of Democratic Republicans who were dissatisfied with the presidency of James Madison. Now, though Madison won re-election, Clinton carried most of the northeastern United States and fared significantly better than the previous 2 Federalist-supported tickets. After the presidential election, Clinton continued to be affiliated with the Democratic Republican Party, which adopted as its logo the tricolor cockade used during the French Revolution. Well, Clinton was governor of New York from 1817 to 1822, and again from 1825 until his sudden death in 1828. Clinton believed that infrastructure improvements could transform American life, drive economic growth, and encourage political participation. He heavily influenced the development of infrastructure both in New York State and in the United States as a whole. And he saw that the Erie Canal was one way to achieve that goal. Now, as a side note, when Clinton died suddenly of heart failure in Albany in February of 1828, he left his family nearly penniless. While he was a fine administrator in government, apparently he handled his own financial affairs rather poorly. After Clinton's death, one of his creditors put in a claim for $6,000 and obtained a judgment that resulted in the public sale of most of the Clinton family possessions. Now, enough money was realized to satisfy the judgment from that estate sale. But not much was left to help the Clinton family. So the governor received a grand state funeral, but when it was over, the family had no place to bury him. So as a result, Clinton's remains were placed in the vault of a family friend in the old Swan Street Cemetery in Albany. 16 years later, however, enough money was collected to provide a suitable burial, and Clinton was reinterred in the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And you can see his grand monument there on your screen. So, sidebar number 2. If Clinton was the main political force behind the Erie Canal, then Benjamin Wright was the force behind the actual construction. As I say, that calls for another sidebar. Wright, who lived from 1770 to 1842, was an American civil engineer who was not only the chief engineer of the Erie Canal, but also the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. In recognition of those achievements, in 1969, the American Society of Civil Engineers declared him the father of American civil engineering. Wright began his career surveying the frontier areas of Oneida and Oswego counties in upstate New York. In 1794, Wright was hired as a surveyor and planner by the noted English canal designer William Weston. Working for Weston, he helped lay out canals and locks along the Mohawk River. After Weston returned to England in 1801, Wright was commissioned by General Philip Schuyler, we had mentioned him a few slides earlier, and that Western Inland Lock Navigation Company. He was for that company to survey the Mohawk River between Schenectady and Rome, New York, and then to the Hudson River. Unfortunately, as we heard earlier in the program, that company lacked the resources to build the large-scale canal that everyone envisioned. But about a decade later, in 1811, Wright surveyed the same route of the Mohawk River from Rome, New York to the Hudson River for the New York State Canal Commission. And by 1816, funding for the Erie Canal was in place, and its construction began in 1817. Now, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, what created challenges for the canal construction were multiple elevation changes along the route. Hence, the supply of water to the canal and the drainage of excess water were far trickier than single sloped canals. To keep water flowing, an elaborate system of feeders and small dams to divert waste were created. Further, the east-west canal had to traverse multiple north-south running rivers, which called for numerous aqueducts. And the largest one employed 11 Roman-style arches to span the 802-foot length, the distance, the width, I should say, of the Genesee River in Rochester, New York. In 1818, Wright was appointed senior engineer in charge of construction of the middle section of the Erie Canal, and later he was placed in charge of the eastern section as well. He led thousands of unskilled laborers as they built the canal with wheelbarrows, hand tools, horses, and mules. And in Wright's honor, one of the first boats to traverse the canal system was named Chief Engineer. And then that brings us to yet another sidebar that I call Who Built It? Well, the Erie Canal was primarily built by Irish immigrants, along with some German immigrants and local American-born workers in the upstate New York area. They were all drawn to the job opportunities that the project created. Now, you might be wondering whether any slaves were used. Well, it turns out that the canal's construction period coincided with the abolition of slavery in New York State. New York State began the process of ending slavery in 1799 with the Gradual Abolition of Slavery Act. That 1799 act freed children of enslaved women born after July the 4th of 1799, but they were indentured until they reached adulthood. In 1817, a further law was passed to free all enslaved people born in New York before 1799, with the final statewide emancipation set for July 4th of 1827. So while there's evidence that a small number of African American individuals worked on the canal project, mainly free black men, overall, the canal was built by hard-working men living in the local area, as well as Irish and some German immigrants. Okay, meanwhile, back to the canal itself. The canal had a traditional prism shape, 40 feet wide on the top, 28 feet wide at the bottom, and 4 feet deep. The Erie Canal required 83 locks, each made of stone, to move boats up and down the natural elevations, especially those between Buffalo and Albany. The locks were designed so that each needed only one person for its operation. Now, to add to the complexity of the project, the fully completed canal eventually required the construction of 18 aqueducts to carry the canal over bodies of water, ranging from a wide river like the Mohawk to gully creeks. And one of those aqueducts was located about halfway between Syracuse and Albany in the town of Little Falls, New York, where the canal crossed the Mohawk River. Now, one of the things that you heard in the bell ringer video, he said that there were two aqueducts. That was in the initial canal. But as time went on, a total of 18 were constructed, some of them replacing smaller locks that had been built to go around river rapids and things like that. So the final count was 18. So now we're in Little Falls, one of the places, and you could see one of those aqueducts there crossing the Mohawk River. Here's the lock as it looks in the 1930s over Little Falls. And here's a little trivia. One interesting aspect of some of the aqueducts was spillage. When barges passed over the aqueduct, water would often spill over the sides. And you can see that here. Here's a barge crossing at Little Falls and you see the water spilling out. And, it's like when you get in a bathtub, you have to be careful about the water level or spill over the sides, right? Well, this may lead you to wonder about winter weather. The scene that I have here on your screen, little stereoscopic photo that I was able to dig up, shows the mammoth icicles that would form on the Little Falls Aqueduct. Now, in general, freezing temperatures and ice damage to the canal walls made it necessary to close the canal, generally from late November or early December until late March or early April. During this time, portions of the canal were drained for routine repairs. And while the canal was closed to boat traffic, the communities along the canal remained active with various recreational activities, including ice skating and sledding, taking place on the frozen canal. As you can see in the pictures I've just put on your screen, these are skaters on the Rochester Aqueduct. So that was lots of fun. So not only was there apparently spillage when boats were going up and down, but just simply because of contraction and expansion and just weather conditions, sometimes there was spillage in the winter and you get all these grand icicles and so forth. But they used the Erie Canal even during the winter months for ice skating. And that became another kind of cash cow for the commission that ran the Erie Canal. When they couldn't run boats, they could lease out portions of the aqueducts to cities for things like ice skating. Now, with nature presenting more daunting obstacles on both the western and eastern sections, construction began in the middle segment on July the 4th of 1817, with Clinton officiating the groundbreaking at Rome, New York. And again, the bell ringer said, quite rightly, that's a little town near Utica, New York. Now, one of the challenges on the western side, probably the greatest challenge, was what's called, and you can see it in the red line there, the Niagara Escarpment. It's a ridge, it's a rock ridge caused by natural erosion that extends 650 miles from upstate New York all the way to the Midwest. And its height ranges from 75 to 150 feet in New York to nearly 1,000 feet in Canada and Wisconsin. Now, to overcome this geological barrier, one of the canal's chief engineers, Nathan B. Roberts, he worked with Wright, designed a series of 10 locks, which consisted of 5 levels with 2 locks side by side to carry boats over and through this obstacle. And these staircase-like locks were followed by a 3-mile-long, 30-foot deep gorge blasted into the rocky plateau. The town that grew up at this site was appropriately named Lockport, New York. Now, on the eastern section, the one that's closer to Albany, Mother Nature also created water obstacles in the lower Mohawk Valley. These required the construction of 27 locks over 30 miles to surmount a series of natural rapids, including those found at Cohoes and Little Falls. We've already seen Little Falls. What you see on your screen in the background is Cohoes, New York. Now, work was undertaken by multiple contractors who agreed to dig small sections of the canal. Each contractor was then responsible for supplying equipment and for hiring, supervising, and paying his own workers. Using horses and sheer muscle-bound manpower, the canal was dug across the state slowly but surely. By the way, since photography didn't take off until the 1840s, most of the construction photos that I'm showing you are from later expansions of the canal. And again, in that bell ringer video at the beginning of our presentation, you heard about expansions that were made. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Now, one of the canal engineers was named Candace White, and he solved one of the greatest construction obstacles of the whole construction project when he discovered how to create a cement that was able to harden underwater. He patented the product in 1825, and he called it Rosendale cement, after the Hudson River town in Ulster County, New York, where it was manufactured. It became the dominant cement in the United States until well into the early 20th century. Having such a local source of hydraulic cement, that's its technical name, hydraulic cement. You can see that on the barrel there that I put up on your screen. Well, having such a local source of hydraulic cement greatly aided the construction process, and it reduced costs by eliminating the need to import European cement. Well, as you heard in the initial video that I showed, the initial building of the canal was a slow grind. They'd only made 15 miles in just a couple of years, and Clinton, it was called Clinton's Ditch and all of that stuff. Well, once they got going, they really got going. And the canal was finally finished in October of 1825, 2 years ahead of schedule. Well, in a grand ceremony, DeWitt Clinton and other dignitaries boarded a ship called the Seneca Chief in Buffalo, New York, on October the 16th of 1825, and traveled the complete length of the canal. The trip took a total of 10 days. They could have done it faster, but there were celebration stops along the way. At the conclusion of the trip in New York City on October the 26th of 1825, Clinton emptied a keg of water from Lake Erie into the Atlantic Ocean, calling it the marriage of the waters. And that is the actual keg there that you see on the right, water from Lake Erie. Well, altogether, the locks, the aqueducts, and the canal itself were considered an American engineering marvel, and it was a great source of pride as an example of how citizens in a republic could improve upon nature and promote progress. In the end, and you've been hearing me use this number, the Erie Canal cost about $7 million to complete, which is over $250 million, with a B, dollars in today's money. It immediately brought economic gains to New York State, and it stimulated development along its entire route. Pulled by mules or horses, canal boats were capable of carrying 30 tons of produce at a time, far more than wagons, which lowered the cost of transporting products from Buffalo to New York City from $100 per ton to less than $10 per ton. Because businesses now had ready access to markets, settlers began moving into upstate New York and beyond New York into Western territories. Thanks to canal traffic, towns along the canal route developed into lively trade-based centers, allowing farm produce from Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Canada to flow with relative ease towards New York City. But trade ran in both directions, as manufactured goods from eastern cities, along with imports from Europe that had been brought to New York, right, they were carried on the canal into western towns and villages. New York City, in particular, saw a dramatic increase in its trade and blossomed as a two-way trading center. In just 9 years of operation, all the tolls, all those tolls charged on the canal had completely repaid the state loan and financed several branch canals in the state, including the Cayuga-Seneca Canal in 1828, the Oswego Canal, also in 1828, and the completion of the Champlain Canal. Portions of it had actually opened in 1823, but it was officially done around 1828 and it was radically expanded in 1903. Now, here's a more detailed look at the major cities and towns that developed into transportation and economic hubs along the Erie Canal. As the eastern terminus of the east-west portion of the canal, Albany became a major port and commercial center, connecting the canal to the Hudson River and the Atlantic Ocean. Besides lumber from the Adirondack Mountains to the north, the primary exports from Albany via the Erie Canal included flour, grain, and other manufactured products, ultimately destined for New York City. A significant hub for trade and industry, Syracuse thrived as a canal city, with the Erie Canal playing a vital role in its growth, primarily by facilitating the export of salt. The canal allowed for the efficient transportation of salt from Syracuse, a major salt-producing region, to other markets, leading to significant growth and prosperity for the city. Thus, it became nicknamed the Salt City. Now, here's some fun trivia. So important was Syracuse as a cultural hub and as a center to the economy of New York and America that during his 1868 tour of America, Charles Dickens bypassed New York City and gave a reading at the Waiting Opera House in Syracuse from A Christmas Carol and the Pickwick Papers. Go Syracuse. Now, Rochester became a major industrial and commercial center as well, with its primary export being flour. In fact, Rochester became known as the Flour City. For much of the mid-19th century, the city became the nation's largest flour producer, primarily due to the abundant hydropower from the Genesee River. And you can see that one of the flour mills there along the river and the hydroelectric plants that were there, the mill plants, I should say, that were built there. Now, as the western terminus of the Erie Canal, Buffalo experienced tremendous growth as a major port and transportation hub, connecting the canal to the Great Lakes and the major cities of the American Midwest, such as Chicago, Milwaukee, and Detroit, to name just a few. Grain products, lumber, and meat flowed into Buffalo and down towards New York City. It's no wonder that the state became known as the Empire State, and that nickname really happened as a great result of the Erie Canal. Now, other notable cities and towns began to blossom as well. Lockport, for example, was a key point in the canal's operation, featuring a series of locks that allowed boats to navigate numerous changes in elevation. Fairport, with a hotel and a post office, became a popular stop for travelers. In fact, Fairport got its name from canal travelers who labeled the stop as a pretty fair port. And I guess on whatever was the equivalent of Yelp back in those days, they called it, it's a pretty fair port. Well, Fairport was a destination for many local and regional farmers. Agricultural products primarily potatoes were shipped from the port, and businesses sprang up to serve workers with production and shipping companies. And one prominent early industry in the area was the production of chemicals such as baking powder used to make potash. And you can see there on this early little poster there, and you can see Fairport, New York. Now, because of the canal, Brockport, which is 25 miles west of Rochester, very quickly became the main market town and transportation hub for the entire region. In 1830, an estimated 100 businesses existed in the village. Because the census counted only 133 families, this meant that three-fourths of the entire population of the town earned its livelihood through commerce. So it was literally a commercial town. And this, by the way, is how Main Street looks today. It's a lovely little town. Utica, New York, became primarily known as an industrial town. And besides wheat and flour, lumber was also a significant export, used for construction and fuel. Utica became, therefore, a hub for manufactured goods like furniture. But it was also known for its machinery, and to this day, it is nationally known for its cutlery. In fact, I have a set of Utica cutlery. I use it every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Meanwhile, Rome, New York, became known for its copper production, earning it the nickname the Copper City. As the headquarters for revereware, the copper tradition of Rome continues to this very day. So if you use a pot that has a copper bottom, for example, and it's revereware, if you look carefully, you'll see that it says Rome, New York. Now, in addition to industry and economics, the canal also had an impact on the social and political history of the United States. Upstate New York was a center for the abolition movement during the Canal era, and anti-slavery ideas spread from port to port. Remember that the canal was completed in 1825, and 2 years later, in 1827, New York State officially abolished slavery. So anti-slavery sentiment, especially against slavery in the South, ran very high in the towns and cities along the canal. Many freedom seekers followed the canal path on their way to Canada, and others settled in towns and cities along the canal. Some of the great leaders of the abolitionist movement lived just a short distance from the canal or in towns directly on it, including Stephen and Harriet Myers in Albany, the Reverend Germain Longen in Syracuse, and William Wells Brown in Buffalo. Now, probably the two most famous voices of the abolitionist movement made the canal route their home and headquarters. Harriet Tubman lived in Auburn. She was a driving force behind the Underground Canal, whose route ran right through the villages near the canal. And Frederick Douglass, well, he published his abolitionist newspaper, the North Star, in Rochester, New York. So both Tubman and Douglass, probably the two most famous names that we think of with abolition, maybe along with Sojourner Truth. New York was the place. It was all along that Erie Canal. Activists organized anti-slavery societies throughout New York State. And in October of 1835, the first convention of the New York Anti-Slavery Society took place in Utica, New York. There were also several prominent figures in New York's abolitionist movement who had businesses along the Erie Canal, and they were Lyman Spalding of Lockport, Isaac and Amy Post of Rochester and Garrett Smith of Utica and New York City. So not only were the abolitionist speakers like uh, Frederick Douglass, the Underground Railroad people like Harriet Tubman, not only were they affiliated with the canal, but also business people like Smith and Spalding and Post. Now, in addition to the abolitionist movement, the Erie Canal also facilitated deeply the rise of the women's movement because it made the travel of suffragists much easier than it might have been, and it allowed the spread of their message across upstate New York. Simply put, the canal provided a pathway for the transmission of nation-changing ideas. Several canals began to connect towns and cities to the main east-west canal system, and one of those cities was Seneca Falls, now known as the birthplace of the women's rights movement. It's located along the Cayuga-Seneca Canal, which connects the Erie Canal. Under the leadership of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and others, the town of Seneca Falls was the host for the first Women's Rights Convention in 1848. Today, visitors can explore the Women's Rights National Historical Park and the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca, New York. Now, meanwhile, and by the way, if you have never visited, it's really a cool place, and this is its building, its permanent building. Now, meanwhile, by 1862, the state had enlarged the canal to 70 feet wide by 7 feet deep, and the lock size was increased to 110 by 18 feet so that larger boats could travel along the canal. Bottom line, water transport, though slow, remained a steady and valuable method of moving freight, particularly bulky or heavy cargo. And if I can say at this point, that's also kind of true today. When you see these huge freighters moving across oceans, carrying, some of them up to 5,000 and 6,000 freight cars. We still use water as a way to transport goods around our planet. In 1915, New York State undertook another major overhaul of the canal system, increasing its dimensions to about 150 feet wide by 12 feet deep, and occasionally changing its original path. And again, in the bell ringer video at the beginning, it said that some of the original canal was abandoned, and that is true. They kind of built new sections of the canal parallel to the old one, but they were much larger. Renamed the New York State Barge Canal, later the New York State Canal System, the system here seen in red connected the main artery of the old Erie Canal with Lake Champlain, Lake Ontario, and the Finger Lakes. This new waterway could handle steamships carrying up to 2,000 metric tons of cargo. Well, in spite of this modernization, trade had changed. Ultimately, the waterway could no longer compete against railroads or the St. Lawrence Seaway, which officially opened in 1959, and traffic on the canal began to dwindle. But again, as we heard in that initial video we watched today, pleasure boats, kayaks, and canoes, and yes, even some commercial vessels share the waterway. And the original horse and mule paths on the old canal are now world-class bike trails. In other words, New York's Erie Canal system has been in continuous operation since 1825, longer than any other constructed transportation system on the entire North American continent. Today, the New York State Canal System includes the original east-west Erie Canal, the Champlain Canal, the Oswego Canal, and the Cayuga-Seneca Canal. As a result, the New York State Canal System links the Hudson River with Lake Champlain, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie, allowing boaters to travel from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Great Lakes and beyond into the Midwest. Now, the Erie Canal may not have been the first canal built in the United States, but it was the most influential and absolutely the most important. America would not be America if it had not been for the Erie Canal. Begun in the spirit of nationalism and optimistic pride in the American Republican system of government, the canal became a symbol of progress and a symbol of what eventually became known as manifest destiny. And to show the connection of the project with the great achievements of the ancient Western world, canal towns, including Rome, Utica, Troy, and Syracuse, were named after classical cities and had prominent buildings, as you can see from the pictures, that employed elements of Greek and Roman architecture. Still considered one of the finest American accomplishments and a testament to the ingenuity of the American character, the Erie Canal was and is a marvel to be viewed by tourists and remains the inspiration not only for photographs and artwork, but for plays, poems, songs, and books. The success of the Erie Canal motivated other states to begin their own canal projects, and engineers trained on the Erie Canal fanned out across the country, providing expertise to those projects. Of course, we must acknowledge the darker side of this monumental engineering project. The construction of the canal led to the displacement of several thriving Native American populations, especially the Seneca Nation. It also caused significant environmental damage, including wetland destruction and the introduction of invasive species of insects and animals. Furthermore, because not every person was a liberal-minded abolitionist or suffrage supporter, the canal intensified existing social tensions, particularly around slavery, temperance, and suffrage, as new settlers from the North and Europe brought those abolitionist and feminist views to the Midwest. Many Irish workers, for example, were afraid that large numbers of freed former black slaves from the South might take away from their jobs. And there were, as you can see in the picture in the upper right corner, there were sometimes riots. But indeed, without diminishing those things, we can easily say that any major project, especially an engineering project, whether in America or elsewhere in the world, is bound to have negative as well as positive ramifications, as the great dams of Egypt and China demonstrate. Yet, by creating our country's first east-west water trade link, the canal not only enhanced New York State's economic growth, but encouraged, for better or worse, the concept of a divinely ordained manifest destiny and the Western expansion of our entire nation from sea to shining sea. So let's review a little of some of what we've talked about today through this short video created by New York State. It's a little bit of I love New York. I Love New York there, and it's a nice little summary. So, gee, maybe I've given you some ideas for your next summer vacation. As someone who has biked along several sections of that heritage corridor, I can tell you that a trip along the Erie Canal is certainly a trip to remember. It's truly a journey down American history. So, happy 200th birthday, Erie Canal. Let's celebrate.
Happy birthday, Erie Canal!
So happy birthday. Yay. Close that out there. Okay, so everyone, thanks for being here today. Um, and again, for those of you who live on the East Coast, particularly, there are going to be some wonderful celebrations along the canal route in different cities in the canal along the canal route, especially in October, which for those of you who know the Northeast is just such a magnificent time to go to upstate New York, the fall foliage and everything. It's really quite something. So maybe you take a fall vacation. Anyway, thanks for being here today, everyone. And for more information on the Erie Canal, please visit my website, makingwings.net, and take that deeper dive number 102. Now, before we talk about next month's presentation, it's time for your thoughts and ideas.